statements for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2022. I'd ask that we go around the table and have members introduce themselves for the record. I am David Hanson, the MLA for Bonnyville, Cold Lake, St. Paul, and the chair of the committee. We will begin starting to my right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Darren Billis, MLA, Edmonton, Beverly, Clareview, and substituting as vice chair.
Good morning, Whitney Isaac, MLA for Calgary Glenmore.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cyril Turton, and I am the MLA for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Good morning. I'm Pete Guthrie, Airdrie Cochrane.
Todd Lowen, MLA, Central Peace Notley.
Marlon Schmidt, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Good morning, Warren Huffman, Committee Clerk.
Now we'll go to the members participating virtually. When I call your name, please introduce yourself for the record. I see Mr. Singh.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Singh, MLA, Calgary East.
And Mr. Yassin.
Good morning, Muhammad Yassin, Calgary North.
And Mr. Getson.
Good morning, Shane Getson, MLA, Lexington Parkland, commonly known as God's Country.
Thank you, Mr. Getson. Due to the current landscape we are in, all ministry staff will be participating in the estimates debate virtually. Minister, please introduce yourself and any officials who are joining you who may be speaking on the record.
Well, thank you, Chair. Got a bit of an echo. And good morning. I will actually just ask folks to go around the table and introduce themselves. I think that's most appropriate. So I'll start here at my right with the Deputy Minister Mental-Paulus.
Hi, Athana Mental-Paulus from TBF. Thank you.
Dana Hogeman, TBF.
Tim Grant, Public Service Commissioner.
Kim Capstick, CPE.
Mark Brisson, Treasury Board and Finance.
Mark Prefontaine, AMCO.
Candice Machado, AGLC.
Another Mark Parsons, TBF.
Darren Headley, Treasury Board and Finance.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to note the following substitution for the record, Mr. Darren Billis for Joe Ceci as Deputy Chair. Before we begin, I would note that in accordance with the recommendations from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, attendees at today's meeting are advised to leave the appropriate distance between themselves and other meeting participants. In addition, as indicated in the February 25th, 2021 memo from Honourable Speaker Cooper, I would remind everyone of committee room protocols in line with health guidelines, which require members to wear masks in committee rooms while seated, except when speaking, at which time they may choose not to wear a face covering. A few housekeeping items to address before we turn to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are being live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislature Assembly website. Those participating virtually are asked to turn on their camera while speaking and please mute their microphone when not speaking. Members participating virtually who wish to be placed on a speaker's list are asked to email or send a message in the group chat to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal the chair. Please put your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of the meeting. Honourable members, the standing orders set out the process for consideration of the main estimates. A total of 6 hours has been scheduled for consideration of the estimates for the Ministry of Treasury Board and Finance. Standing Order 59.01-7 establishes the speaking rotation and speaking times. In brief, the Minister or members of the Executive Council acting on the Minister's behalf will have 10 minutes to address the committee. At the conclusion of his comments, a 60-minute speaking block for the official opposition begins, followed by a 20-minute speaking block for independent members, if any, and then a 20-minute speaking block for the government caucus. Individuals may only speak for up to 10 minutes at a time, but time may be combined between the member and the minister. The rotation of speaking time will then follow the same rotation of the official opposition, independent members, and the government caucus. With individual speaking time set to 5 minutes for both the member and the ministry, these times may be combined into a 10-minute block. One final note, please remember that discussion should flow through the chair at all times, regardless of whether or not speaking times are combined. If members have any questions regarding speaking times or the rotation, please feel free to send an email or message the committee clerk about the process. With the concurrence of the committee, I will call a 5-minute break near the midpoint of the meeting, which we have decided would be right after the 20-minute government caucus speaking block. However, the 3-hour clock will continue to run. Does anyone oppose to taking a break? Hearing none, we will take a break at that scheduled time. Ministry officials at the direction of the minister may address the committee. Ministry officials are asked to please introduce themselves for the record prior to commenting. Space permitting, opposition caucus staff may sit appropriately distanced at the table to assist their members. However, members have priority to sit at the table at all times. If debate is exhausted prior to 6 hours, the ministry's estimates are deemed to have been considered for the time allotted in the schedule and the committee will adjourn. Points of order will be dealt with as they arise and individual speaking times will be paused. However, the speaking block time and the overall 3-hour meeting clock will continue to run. Any written material provided in response to questions raised during the main estimates should be tabled by the minister in the assembly for the benefit of all members. The vote on the estimates and any amendments will occur in Committee of Supply on March 17th, 2021. Amendments must be in writing and approved by Parliamentary Council prior to the meeting at which they are to be moved. The original amendment is to be deposited with the committee clerk, and as a courtesy, an electronic version of the signed original should be provided to the committee clerk for distribution to committee members. I now invite the Minister of Treasury Board and Finance to begin with your opening remarks, and you have 10 minutes, sir.
Well, thank you, Chair. I would like to take a bit of time and just talk about the fiscal plan and budget 2021 in general. The budget 2021 was founded on 3 key themes. The first priority and first theme was to ensure that we were adequately resourcing healthcare to deal with the pandemic and to deal with any of the other issues that have arisen from the pandemic with respect to healthcare in Alberta. That was priority number 1. And that priority is well reflected in budget 2021. The second priority in this fiscal plan is economic recovery. Ultimately, as 2021 moves forward and we start to see a significant number of Albertans receive immunization from COVID, I believe economic recovery will become priority number 1 at that point in time. But it's certainly reflected as a key priority in this budget. I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. The third priority is a priority that we established in budget 2019, the first fiscal plan that we presented to the House and to Albertans. And that is a continued focus on the efficient delivery of government services. This is a priority that I believe should be paramount in every budget, in every fiscal plan, and it continues in budget 2021. Just to highlight a few of the key fiscal metrics in budget 2021 and recognize, well, I would expect that most of you have the budget with you today, the fiscal plan with you today. We are projecting revenues for 21-22, the upcoming fiscal year, to improve slightly over the year that we're in right now. We are expecting revenues to go up by approximately $1.4 billion. That's based on what I would characterize as very modest economic assumptions that have informed our revenue projections. I'm sure we'll have a conversation about those assumptions later on in this meeting, and I would welcome that conversation. Our operating expenditures are expected to go up. In fact, we're budgeting them to go up by $500 million over budget 2020, and in fact, a full $1 billion over what we're projecting to be actual results in our current fiscal year. That is almost entirely made up of a addition to health's budget. This addition of over $900 million will appear in every year of the fiscal plan going forward. So it will also appear in 22-23 and 23-24. This additional $900 million is advanced to health to deal with what has been increasing wait times for surgeries and other essential procedures in health. Wait times that were already too high pre-COVID, but wait times that have grown as a result of the stress that COVID has created on our healthcare system. The other reason for the increased funding for health is that a number of the reforms that have been planned for the delivery of healthcare in the province have been necessarily delayed. Again, due to COVID and the pandemic, those reforms are not permanently shelved, but they've been delayed, and the Minister of Health has plans to pick those up after we're past the pandemic. Other expense is projected to be $800 million higher than our budget in 2020-2021, and that's due to increased debt service costs, which will come as no surprise given the fact that we have, in this current year and in the upcoming fiscal year, have necessarily had to borrow from capital markets in order to fund the operations of this government to a much higher degree than we would have anticipated. That's due largely to massive decline in revenues due to what I characterize as a triple black swan event with respect to the Alberta economy, dealing with the largest contraction in the global economy since the Great Depression, really an unprecedented collapse in energy prices, and of course, dealing with a pandemic within our own borders, which continues today. The other part of that increase is an increase in capital grants. That increase in capital grants is related to our economic stimulus effort, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. We are projecting $1.1 billion to be specifically earmarked to economic recovery and economic growth as a result of the challenges necessary as a result of the challenges that we've experienced with the COVID pandemic and resulting economic collapse. I'm sure we'll go into those details, and I look forward to that in our conversation. We are also adding $1.25 billion in a healthcare contingency, and these funds, this contingency, is specifically earmarked for additional resource demand from health to deal with the pandemic. At this point in time, we don't know how long we'll be dealing with the pandemic. We can't, with real precision, determine what costs are ahead of us, ahead of health this upcoming year. But we know that there will be extra resources required, and we've said all along, and Budget 2021 continues to reflect this priority, that we will ensure that healthcare is adequately resourced, fully resourced, to meet the challenge of the pandemic. Included in Budget 2021 in the upcoming year is a $500 million contingency for economic recovery. And again, with the uncertainty around the pandemic and the effect that has on the Alberta economy, we know that should the effects of the pandemic drag out, public health restrictions, if they're required to be continued, there could be additional relief requirement for Alberta businesses and perhaps even for individual Albertans. We also are currently working through the preparation of a whole series of sector strategies, and while that work is not completed for many of the sector strategies, I would anticipate that there could be a funding request that we can't predict today, but an additional funding request for some of those sector strategies. We don't want to delay that important work. We want to ensure that there are resources available to kick those sector strategies off on a timely basis, and for that reason, we've set aside $500 million, again, in a contingency of fund that can be allocated to economic development and recovery. We are budgeting $1 billion for crude by rail. These costs reflect really the costs and obligations that this government inherited when we took office. With the great economic collapse, energy price reduction that we experienced last spring, and the very narrow differentials that have continued to this point, the economics around crude by rail simply are not there. And the remaining contracts that we have today have very little value. APMC continues to work to assign these contracts to recoup any incremental value assign these contracts to the private sector. But again, at this point in time, they really have very little value. So we are meeting our obligations in these contracts, and the $1 billion represents the totality of our financial obligations with respect to crude by rail. All of that is leaving us with a projected $18.2 billion deficit for the upcoming year. In the out years, in 22-23 and 23-24, we're projecting revenues to increase by just under 8% per year to in 23-24 to approach just under $51 billion, leaving us with budget deficits of just under 11 billion in 22-23 and just under 8 billion in 23-24. This also assumes that expenditures will remain relatively flat, which we are projecting. As I see my time is coming to a close, perhaps I'll wrap up with this. Again, budget 2021 was a budget that contains three key priorities that I believe are the pertinent, salient priorities for the province at this point in time. Resourcing healthcare, positioning the province for economic recovery and growth, and continuing to ensure that we're delivering government services most efficiently. So, Chair, I'll leave my comments there, and I'm happy to, I'm looking forward to the next 3 hours.
Thank you, Minister. For the hour that follows, members of the official opposition and the Minister may speak. The timer will be set for 20-minute intervals, so you're aware of the time. Would you like to combine your time with the Minister's time?
I would like to request that I combine my time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Minister, you're okay with going back and forth?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Minister, for those opening remarks. So on February 23rd, the day before Budget 2021, the Premier held a news conference and went into some detail on the state of the province's finances. He said that things were, looking up, and the deficit for the current year would be in the range of 14 billion. In fact, here's the headline. Premier says that budget deficit will be in 14 billion range, take years to balance. So I asked the Minister yesterday in question period, as part of our International Women's Day of women asking questions about this, and Minister of Finance told me to read the budget. I did read the budget. So can the Minister share with the committee and point to the line item that shows me the Premier's $14 billion deficit?
All right. Good. Appreciate that question and the opportunity to provide clarity. I think, as we all know, as I just explained, our upcoming projected deficit is $18.2 billion. I would find it of no value to speak to a media report, but it's clear that our budget deficit is 18.2 as reflected in the fiscal plan.
Thank you for that confirmation. So yesterday there was a re-announcement of the 2021 capital plan, and it was characterized by the Premier as historic and the largest ever. To be more specific, he said that spending in fiscal year 2021 would end up being the largest in Alberta's history. So on page 186 of the fiscal plan, that contains the historical fiscal summary so that Albertans can compare. I see that in 2017-18, the previous government spent over $9 billion in capital, and this fiscal year, the so-called historic spend is 8.2. So how is 8.2 more than 9?
Right. Again, appreciate the chance to provide some clarification there. Included in our infrastructure spend, at least in terms of categorization, we've been including the investment in KXL, which would put us at close to $10 billion for the current year that we're in. That was an investment that actually did provide thousands of jobs in the summer of 2021. And so when you combine that expenditure, that would put us at a record expenditure, capital expenditure.
So can I just verify that Minister, you meant that the jobs were provided in summer of 2020 when the Montana crossing was completed? Is that what you're referring to? Or are you saying that there that this historic capital spend of a pipeline that is not getting built was going to puts in the model, both in the capital spend, but also in the jobs projections, summer 2021, thousands of jobs that are not in fact happening?
Yeah, I was referring to the activity that took place in our current fiscal year, the fiscal year that ends in approximately 3 weeks.
Okay, all right. So I am to understand then that the reference to the largest capital plan in Alberta history includes money that is spent on people not building capital because KXL was cancelled.
I think we have to recognize that in the summer of 2020, there was a significant effort in the construction of KXL in the province of Alberta, and again, that put many Albertans to work in the southeast corner of the province, and it was a very significant infrastructure investment in play that created well over 1,000 jobs.
I'm wondering, Minister, if you could provide us an undertaking, just the written confirmation of the number of jobs that happened within Alberta, and how many of those jobs were to complete the border crossing in Montana, and if those were in fact Canadians working there or Americans. That would be, I think, good for us to know just how many Albertans were working on that. I agree that it is absolutely correct that thousands of good paying construction jobs come from projects like this. There is no question about that, but I do have questions as to how many were in fact Canadian jobs, so that would be good to know. Now, I'm just going to move on to the 3-year capital plan, Minister, if I could. Yesterday, the 3-year capital plan was also characterized as historic and called the largest ever. And it was referring to fiscal years 21 through to 23, Minister, so not looking back as we've just done. And it is a large amount, and we know and we share the view that this is one way to get people to work quickly. And so 22 billion is a large amount, and I think it's important to keep building this province. But as indicated on page 186 of the fiscal plan, under the previous government, capital plan spending was 23 billion, and that was fiscal years 16 to 18. So again, I'm wondering how it is that 22 is larger than 23.
All right. Well, I will say this, that the capital plan that we are presenting in budget 2021 is a very significant capital plan. It's a capital plan that will put, that's expected to support 50,000 direct jobs in the province of Alberta and 40,000 indirect jobs. Maybe more importantly, as importantly, it's a plan that will provide key core infrastructure to communities in Alberta, actually right across the province. It's also a plan that will support strategic projects that will improve our competitiveness and productivity, projects that will result in increased attraction of private capital and result in economic growth and economic fiscal capacity. These are projects that will provide real value for future Albertans.
Thank you, Minister. We certainly share that view that investment in capital is a good way to get people back to work, particularly in times of economic downturn, which is why the largest capital plan ever was under the previous government at 23 billion. So just wondering on these jobs numbers, if you can confirm my understanding, then, Minister, that the 50,000 direct jobs as a result of the capital plan, does that include any projected jobs from the inclusion of the KXL investment into the capital plan?
No, it doesn't.
Can I get that in some kind of rating of what what's actually involved in the modeling out of? I know that it's straightforward multipliers that folks use when doing those jobs projections based on capital expenditure, and I know that's a straightforward calculation, but I'm wondering if you can provide that list of which projects are in fact feeding into that 50,000 direct and 40,000 indirect into the model. And I just want to confirm one more understanding, Minister, on page, I believe it's 93 of the capital plan. Is it 93? We have employment in millions projected in the fiscal plan. And we have a low scenario and a high scenario and a base case scenario. Are the 50,000 direct or the 90,000 direct and indirect contained within the base case scenario that you have provided to Albertans?
Yes, they would be included in the base case scenario because that's the scenario that we presented in Budget 2021. And that scenario includes our current capital plan.
Okay. So I want to, it's actually page, so the low and high scenarios are on page 93 that I referred to, Minister, but sorry for that conclusion. The actual scenario impacts analysis is on page 64 of the fiscal plan. So I want to turn our attention to that now and confirm some of my understanding because, you know, in the opening remarks, I didn't hear it, with the exception of I think the capital plan at the end, a real commitment to investing in creating jobs. I heard about strategies that are not done, but I didn't hear about that. So let's talk about jobs a little bit with reference to this page 64 of the fiscal plan. So total employment, according to our most up-to-date figures that I can find in the GOA labor notes, which is published by Treasury Board and Finance, and I appreciate the civil services work on this. So total employment, which is the most up-to-date, is on February 5th, was published as 2.181 million employed Albertans. And so that's a 3.5% reduction year over year. So then I went and looked at our total employment numbers for February 2017, 18, 19, 20. Those numbers too are published by Labor Notes out of your ministry. And then I read page 64 of the fiscal plan with quite a bit of interest. So the base case projected by the ministry for total employment is that this year we will have 2.265 million Albertans employed. So we have some ground to make up there, and I think we all understand that certainly COVID has had an effect on the economy. But that projection for 2021 that has been prepared by your department, Minister, projects fewer Albertans employed than in February 2017. So next year, the base case shows that we'll have 2.331 employed Albertans. That's virtually the same as in February 2018. The base case scenario projected by this government for number of people with jobs doesn't grow past 2018 levels until 2023. So that's 5 straight years of total numbers of jobs lower than it was under the previous government, but with a higher population. So can you explain, Minister, how it is that this budget is not projecting job growth to exceed that of February 2018 for like 4 years?
Sure, I'm happy to relay my observations. There's 2 reasons. One reason is that we've in fact been dealing with a global pandemic which has created a massive contraction in the global economy. We've experienced unprecedented collapse in energy prices, and we're dealing with a pandemic within our borders. And that's had a great effect on the economy of the province. All of this outside of our control. The second reason why I believe job creation is struggling is because we inherited a government with egregious economic policy put in place by our predecessors. Economic policy that pushed taxes up, drove investment out of this province by the tens of billions of dollars. And we are working to create a business environment that is again conducive to investment attraction. It will take some time, but I'm very confident that we will create that business environment. In fact, we're a long ways there now. That will result in increased private sector attraction and increased job opportunities in the intermediate and long term. It's difficult to turn the narrative in a few months when a previous government has created such a negative economic environment.
Interesting, Minister, because in February 2018, there were 2.314 Albertans with jobs, and before the pandemic and the collapse in oil prices. And by the way, that 2018 was under conditions of a 12% corporate income tax rate for those who earn in excess of $500,000 a year profit. But before the pandemic, there had not been, and the price collapse, there had not been job growth, but the CIT rate had been dropped. And in fact, one would think that if those strategies were actually working, we would see employment growth being quite a bit higher than 2018 levels before 22-23. But we don't see that. We have, in this page 64 of the fiscal plan, what we are seeing is that there are fewer Albertans employed in 2022 than in 2018. And so does this not then lead to a conclusion that perhaps these sectoral strategies need to be accelerated and have actual dollars associated with them? Because that too, we do not see in this fiscal plan.
So I'm happy to make a couple of comments. Firstly, there was something, again, called the COVID pandemic that came in between. And I think it's very difficult to exclude that fact and that great challenge that we're dealing with as a province. All Albertans are dealing with it. Number two, we had introduced our policies, in fact, our first budget in October 2019. By the first 2 months of 2020, we were already seeing early signs of an economic response, a response to investment attraction. Employment is lagging, but we were seeing a very positive response in terms of investment intentions for 2020. I'm very confident that 2020 would have been a turnaround year as a result of those economic policies that we had put into place and were beginning to put into place. COVID got in the way of that. Now, secondly, I would agree with your assertion that we need to move forward with the sector strategies as quickly as possible. They're a key part of our economic recovery plan. They are an important piece, and this is about identifying sectors where we believe we have a competitive advantage, naturally a competitive advantage, and positioning those sectors for maximum growth. They include, of course, our traditional sectors such as energy and agriculture and forestry, but they also include emerging sectors such as tech. And there's such a great story there in this past year, in spite of the recession. They include health sciences and pharmaceuticals. They also include tourism. They include aviation and aerospace and financial services.
Agreed. And so that would suggest that we are moving beyond, the simple insertion of a couple of paragraphs of prose into the fiscal plan, which is what we see here. One would think that a budget that is entitled Lives and Livelihoods might want to actually help people have a livelihood. February 2018, the unemployment rate was 6.6%. On page 71 of the fiscal plan, we have the Government of Alberta unemployment rate benchmark forecasts, taking an average of the private sector forecasts. In February 2020, the unemployment rate, seasonally adjusted, was 7.5, which is, frankly, before, as the minister characterizes, something called the pandemic. Yeah, aware of that. It's kind of affected my life too. So we have a 6.6 going to a 7.5, and we don't actually, in these forecasts, go to anything lower than a 6.6 projection until 2024, when it's pretty hard to make projections. We all know that. So how is it that a budget that says it is focused on livelihoods is projecting an unemployment rate higher than in 2018, and for most of the years, higher than it was in 2017 as well? And how is it that we are projecting such dismal unemployment rates for so many years? Where's the light at the end of the tunnel for Albertans?
Here's the reality. The pandemic hit this province very, very hard. And we're not going to be disingenuous with Albertans and create an economic scenario that is unrealistic. We've taken a very cautious approach in our economic assumptions that have informed revenue projections, that have informed our employment projections. And I'm sure you've noticed that we're projecting WTI at $46 for the upcoming year. That, I would say, is a very cautious, responsible approach. We've seen in the last 2 weeks to 3 weeks, WTI prices move very, very quickly. Again, we're basing our revenue projections and employment projections on very modest economic assumptions. And here's the other reality. This COVID pandemic, and particularly the energy price crash, has hit this province disproportionately hard. And these projections reflect that. It's because of the economic policies that we have put in place in the province and the sector strategies that we are in the process of rolling out. It's because of our effort around red tape reduction and regulatory modernization that we believe we will see the growth that we're projecting.
I heard a... Oh, okay, sorry. I just wanted to defer to you, Chair. Okay. All right, so we have heard that the largest capital plan in Alberta's history includes a capital expenditure on a piece of capital that is not getting built. So let's talk about that piece of capital that is not being built. And let's talk a little bit about Keystone XL and that investment, because people have a lot of questions, including me. This investment is through the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission. And the Energy Annual Report from last year, I believe it's page 31, indicates that APMC, or the Government of Alberta rather, provided, in the past tense, $1.5 billion in equity, and then it put and will provide in the future tense the loan guarantee of, in excess of 6. I can't, the precise number I can find, the precise reference. So I would like to know how it is that it appears in an annual report that the money was provided. It doesn't just appear that way, it reads that way. That is the verb, and that is the tense, in the past tense. So where do I find the line item for that $1.5 billion that the GOA told the public through the statutory release of an annual report in a Government of Alberta document provided in 2020? Where is that line?
All right, Chair, if I can, I also want to just add an additional response to the previous discussion item. We've taken a very cautious, conservative approach in budget 2021 in terms of our economic assumptions. But there's a lot of really great things going on out there, and I just want to highlight some of those. We're seeing more and more businesses actually move staff into Calgary, into Alberta. mCloud Technologies is relocating to Calgary. Suncor is moving its Ontario offices to Calgary. Infosys has just announced it's going to add 500 positions in Calgary. We've seen record tech venture capital investment, largely in the tech sector, over this last year. We have an increased projection in terms of capital expenditure in the energy industry from CAP, an increase projected in 2021 of nearly $3.4 billion. BMO, just read this morning. BMO is
Pretty sure that wasn't the question, Minister. Absolutely not.
To lead the nation.
And Minister, please. The Minister is under no obligation to answer your question. You may not like the answer, but if you're going to get angry, you project your anger at me, not at the Minister. Please. Carry on, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. And
Absolutely,
again, I think this is
through the
very
chair.
pertinent information. BMO is actually now predicting Alberta to lead the country in terms of real GDP growth at 6.5% in 2021. So yes, we've taken a very conservative, prudent economic assumptions so that we can take a thoughtful, careful approach to budget 2021. But I'm very encouraged with the economic signs I'm seeing out there, and it's a confirmation that our economic approach and policies are working. Now, with respect to KXL, the KXL investment, of course, is held by APMC, as the member noted. And at this point, and in budget 2021, we've been very transparent with Albertans in terms of our exposure. Our exposure is just under $1.3 billion. It wasn't the full 1.5. We had an arrangement with TC where we advanced funds as construction progressed. The construction season was impaired largely due to some weather issues and COVID. So the full $1.5 billion investment wasn't required, and it wasn't advanced. Our total exposure is just under 1.3 at this point, and we've been transparent with Albertans. Obviously, we'll be relooking at this and appropriate reporting when we hit our year end and consider our annual report. Our year end's coming up in 3 weeks.
So there's $100 million that the Auditor General asked to be booked in the previous fiscal year in 1920. And I'm wondering if you can confirm for me where that expenditure appears.
Again, that is an expenditure that would appear on APMC's books. It would be considered an investment. And that was a timing issue that was dealt with by the Auditor General and with our officials at Treasury Board and Finance. Nothing unusual in the course of an audit as they work to ensure appropriate treatment and timing of the recognition, expense recognition.
So I would appreciate as an undertaking if folks could follow up in writing, either in the TBF annual report, that's a really big, or in the energy annual report, or in any of the fiscal plan documents that we have in front of us, if that specific line item of where that initial 1920 APMC 100 million expenditure shows up, that would be, I think, just helpful for us to know where those funds are coming from. Can you confirm then, Minister, that the rest of the, as I understand it, at this point, 1.3 billion, can you confirm which line where we will be able to find that expenditure?
All right. Again, that expenditure is outlay is reported on APMC's financial statements, and again, those financial statements get consolidated, or pardon me, the income gets reflected in the Government of Alberta's revenues. But again, those amounts would be considered an investment at APMC and not an outright expenditure. They would have been recorded and capitalized as an investment.
So how is it then that it was told to Albertans that the equity contribution was provided in 2020 if it wasn't?
Again, we had an arrangement with TC where we provided funds on a pay-as-you-go basis. That was a protection so that we would only fund real progress on the pipeline development. And that's the way the project went.
Can I just get some clarity on how the loan guarantee moved as well? Because in those documents, it also said that the loan guarantee would begin on January 2021. So can you show me where those funds are booked in this in the budget?
Again, we have provided no disclosure in terms of our exposure. Our exposure doesn't change, whether it be an exposure to in the form of equity or in the form of a loan guarantee. TC Energy paid down, repurchased a part of the equity position of the Alberta government. They had that option in early 2021. They drew on an operating line that the government of Alberta has guaranteed. Again, doesn't change our total exposure. Our total exposure remains at just under 1.3 billion.
I'm just going to clarify. Our total exposure is 1.3 billion at this time. Or is that the total exposure, and that's what the ministry would like to provide us in writing in terms of the assurances to the people of Alberta?
Yeah, our total exposure is just under $1.3 billion. It is not expected to increase materially.
Was any of the equity contribution rolled into the loan guarantee?
As I mentioned, the TC Energy exercised an option and purchased a part of the Alberta government's equity position. They drew on an operating line that the Alberta government has provided a guarantee on. And so, again, this was within the agreement. It does not increase the province's exposure.
When did TC exercise that that conversion from, or the I guess buyback of the equity? What date was that?
It was in very early 2021.
Can officials maybe provide as an undertaking, as a written follow-up, when that happened?
Point of order noted. Go ahead, Mr. Lowen.
Under 23B, the member continues to talk about past budgets and past dates and past things when we have the documents in front of us that clearly state that these estimates are for this year's budget going forward. And so I think, I think there's been a lot of latitude allowed the member to be discussing things from past years, going back to, I think, 2017, we've been discussing so far. I think we need to be talking about the matter that's in front of us, which is the estimates provided for this fiscal year upcoming, and this continuing to go back in the past and ask questions and discuss matters that are irrelevant. So-and-so said this on such and such a date, and how it relates to what we're doing here, I think is, I think we've got a long ways from where we're supposed to be in this estimates process.
Thank you, Mr. Lowen. Response, Mr. Billis.
Yes, 100%. This is not a point of order. In fact, the minister just said that a decision was made January of 2021 directly impacting this current budget. What MLA Phillips is doing is talking about previous, which led up to today, including in today's budget, the dollars that the government of Alberta is required to pay in the current budget. This is absolutely relevant. This is not a point of order, and she should be allowed to continue her line of questioning.
Okay, thank you. Any other members with input? Hearing none, prepared to rule on this. I agree. I don't actually see a point of order here at this point. I would encourage the member to try and stick to the relevant documents that we have before us. But there is some history involved with that investment from last year that affects this year's budget. So please carry on, but try and, like I said, if you if you have moments that you would project through the chair, I'm here for a purpose. So I'd appreciate that, so you can please carry on.
So on page 34 of the fiscal plan, we have some prose here about the Keystone XL. And I am looking to confirm my understanding of this. So we've just heard from the minister that they don't expect their exposure to go beyond much, or at least I believe the characterization was materially. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Minister, beyond this 1.2, 1.3 sort of range. So, and that's in Canadian dollars. So if that's the case, great. We don't know, because we are in a trust but verify kind of situation here, because we haven't seen anything approaching the structure of this agreement. But why not then book this in the budget? Because it's not in the budget papers, at least that I can find. I'm happy to be directed to the line item where this 384...
Noted, Mr. Guthrie.
Under 23C, in needless repetition, to me, this is, I think, now the fourth time that we've heard basically the same question being asked in a different fashion. The minister has clearly answered this numerous times. I personally, I think I got it the first 3 times, but if we could move on, it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you. A response?
Absolutely. Again, this is not a point of order, and I'm happy to hear that the member states his opinion of what he thinks, but this is exactly what it is. It's a matter of debate on maybe he feels that the minister's answered the question. I yet have not heard an answer to the question. This is estimates which the member is welcome to continue to ask the minister as many different ways as she likes. This is not question period. This is not an issue that's been dealt with in the chamber. And in fact, she's asking about the $100 million as it relates to this budget, to which there has not been an answer yet, but this is not a point of order. And just to clarify, Mr. Chair, that the time for the official opposition is on pause for every point of order debate, correct?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 20-minute speaking block continues to run, but her speaking time, the 5 and 5 minutes, that's paused. But the 20-minute the 60-minute speaking block continues.
And it was, remember, it was laid out in the directions as we opened up, okay?
Well, if we continue that frivolous points of order, then I'll have an issue with that.
Absolutely, sir, that is right. Prepared to rule on this. Again, the line of questioning is within the parameters of the budget estimates. It's line items and deals with the documents in place. That being said, we're in these budget estimates for 6 hours. If the members of the opposition want to spend the entire 6 hours on one line of questioning when there's an entire document available, that's their prerogative. And also, the minister is under absolutely no obligation to answer the question. Okay? So if you want to continue down this line of questioning and not get the answer that you want, whether the minister answers you to your satisfaction or not is irrelevant. So if you want to continue with this line of questioning and, carry on, it's your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just so that we're really clear about what I was asking about. I was asking about, first of all, there was an initial equity contribution of $100 million that was booked in the 19-20 year, and I just wanted to know where it was, because this was as a result of some findings of the Auditor General in November. Just wanted to confirm what line item. So that was one topic that I asked about. I also asked about, why is it the government said they provided in the past tense in 2020 $1.5 billion. Turns out that wasn't the case. So I just wanted to confirm my understanding on that. And now we are here in 2021. I have documents in front of me with a different story, page 32 of the fiscal plan, where it says that we are on the hook for in the neighborhood of 1.276 billion. So, and I've just heard from the minister that he does not expect that to accelerate considerably. Good to know. And I'm glad that we were able to get an answer for people on that. But now my question is, so if we have equity payment, estimate of loan guarantee, our exposure to February 21, we have some idea of what our exposure is. Why isn't that, unless it is, Why isn't that in this budget?
So again, Chair, we've been very transparent with Albertans in terms of what the exposure is for the government of Alberta with respect to our investment in KXL. And we will be reconsidering this right now. We're working with TC Energy on every option available to us. Obviously, the highest priority would be to see this pipeline go forward. Should it not be able to go forward in any way, shape, or form, at that point in time, we will look to take every means available to us, including through our trade agreements, to recoup and recover costs. We've been transparent with Albertans in terms of our exposure. We will be reconsidering the treatment of this asset in reporting treatment in our 2021 annual report, year end, which is coming up in a few weeks.
So any of the contingencies that are provided for in this budget, is that where we're going to see this 1.3 billion show up eventually?
Again, this is an asset owned by APMC, so it will be reflected on APMC's operating results, and ultimately, again, we'll ensure appropriate treatment of this asset. We will have additional clarity at the time we're preparing our year-end financial statements for the current fiscal year. Again, right now, we are working in the best interest of Albertans to pursue every option in the public interest around KXL. That work continues, and Chair, this member, this committee, and Albertans can know and be assured that we will continue to be fully transparent with this investment going forward.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. I want to move on to FTEs now for a moment. So we got some information via Freedom of Information that has since been shared publicly as well, that the department figured that there could be 41 million in savings a year by bringing ATRF into AIMCO. We had a look at the AIMCO business case that we obtained by Freedom of Information and showed that the other AIMCO existing clients would save 29 million annually for the consolidation of all the pension plans. We'll get back. Was that the?
No, 20 more minutes.
Okay, sorry.
That was your
and this, the 41 million at any rate was also repeated in the House on November 26, 2019, I believe, in question period. So, but according to the 2021 TBF estimates on page 223, AIMCO Investment Management Services costs to Albertans are going up $188 million from 2019-20 actuals to budget 2021. So how is it we're spending $188 million to save 41?
Well, I will say this, that actually our costs for the current year with respect to AIMCO are lower than we had projected in the budget. And that is a result of not basically a somewhat delayed asset transfer process from ATRF, WCB, and AHS. However, I can report that that transfer process is going well at this point in time. And I will have Mark Prefontaine make maybe a few comments in just a moment around the state of play at AIMCO. But our assertion that by moving effectively the pension fund assets from ATRF into AIMCO to be managed by AIMCO with the other pension fund assets related to the government of Alberta, our assertion that it will create economies of scale, result in lower costs to administer the investments, that remains sound. And I had a conversation with AIMCO officials yesterday. They remain very convinced that in the upcoming periods that they will be able to deliver on those efficiencies. I have a couple of examples of efficiencies. I'll look to Mark to expand on those, but here's an example. Both ATRF and AIMCO use very sophisticated software. They purchase this software on an annual basis, software as a service basis, And they're able to eliminate a duplication on that item alone, which is going to have very material savings overall to savings that will be reflected in lower premiums than they otherwise would have been for Alberta government and public sector employees, and savings for Alberta taxpayers. Again, all of these funds in education and health, of course, will be put right towards frontline service delivery. So I remain very confident that the value proposition that we presented will in fact be delivered. But I'll ask Mark to make a few comments, if that's okay, Chair.
Go ahead, have him introduce himself.
You may have to go to the podium. I don't know if they disagree.
Yeah, he'll probably have to go to the podium, sir.
Good morning, Mark Prefontaine with AIMCO. And thank you, Minister, for the comments. I'll build on the Minister's comments about expected savings based on transitions as they stand today. First of all, I'll affirm the Minister's comments. The transitions are going well. They are well underway. The savings that we're seeing now really fall into two categories. One is the reduction of duplication, and that is in things like software and data costs. And then another is a duplication of service. So both AIMCO and ATRF use custodians for the purposes of managing the assets. And by transitioning assets into AIMCO as one asset manager, we're able to not only eliminate custodial costs with ATRF, but also because of the aggregation of assets economies of scale, negotiate favorable terms going forward for the management of those assets, as well as the ongoing management of our existing clients' assets. So in terms of saving opportunities that are actually being realized today, those are a couple of examples. Now, the question posed about the increase in the AIMCO budget versus the publicly available estimated savings longer term, really we need to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. So the savings that have been publicly disclosed are measured against the aggregation or total costs of all the entities managing the assets separately versus AIMCO managing those assets as one consolidated asset manager on behalf of those clients, versus the cost increase you're seeing year over year as indicated in the budget for AIMCO reflects the increase in assets under the management of AIMCO, and it does lead to increased costs where the savings really should be measured on a per unit basis or a basis points basis longer term. But our costs are really driven by a number of things. First and foremost, by our clients' decisions to allocate to certain asset classes. And while the transition is going on with ATRF, WCB, and AHS, our other clients continue to look at their asset allocation and, as a general trend, continue to allocate additional assets into real asset classes or liquid asset classes that are typically more costly to manage just given the type of assets and typically require additional staff, boots on the ground, if you will, to manage those real estate infrastructure and private equity assets.
Thank you for that detailed answer, Mr. Prefontaine. Now, I can assume then that the 49 new FTEs coming into AIMCO and the fairly dramatic escalation in costs from 389, and this is for the minister, sorry, from 389 million until today, which we're looking at 577, that because this is now consolidated in and ATRF wasn't before, as I understand it, right? This represents, even though it looks like a dramatic escalation of costs and FTEs, when both things are running contrary to what the fiscal plan stated objectives are. I'm going to assume then that there is analysis prepared by Treasury Board and Finance, ATRF, on the number of FTEs, the cost per basis point, as Mr. Prefontaine, for active management, as he points out, that is a good metric. So I would like to request, as a written undertaking, what underlies this assumption that 577 million, a fairly dramatic escalation in costs for investment management services, includes the savings that the AIMCO business case alluded to back in the fall of 19. And it includes eliminating that duplication that has been referenced a couple of times. I think Albertans need to see that the outcomes of the decisions that were taken in fall of 19 and subsequent around AIMCO's role in public sector pension management actually resulted in the cost savings that were projected or something close to it, and if not, what's the plan to achieve that? And some explanation for the explosion in costs and FTEs.
All right. Well, I think that's a fair request, and I would share that request that the member has identified, because at the end of the day, our motive was ultimately to reduce duplication, reduce redundancy. We had two what I would characterize as very successful asset managers. One was considerably larger than the other, but there was a duplication, a redundancy in terms of capacity, a redundancy in terms of costs. And the analysis that was conducted demonstrated that there would be an efficiency if we could bring together effectively the function of those two organizations. And that's what we have embarked on. And the transfer is going well. And I'm confident that we will be able to demonstrate how, again, combining this capacity will result in efficiencies at the end of the day. As the member pointed out, ATRF's costs are not consolidated in the Government of Alberta financial statements, and so that is one reason why costs are going up. The other thing I want to point out as well is that a significant amount of costs related to investment management, particularly at ATRF, has been the utilization of third-party managers, and so that's a very significant cost. That, again, as expertise is pulled over to AIMCO with AIMCO's deep expertise, as well as some very key personnel moving from ATRF to AIMCO, which is improving and strengthening their capacity. That much more of that work can be done in-house, and that will result in significant savings.
Okay. Thank you. I would like to refer the minister to page 174 of the Fiscal Plan, Schedule 14, the Statement of Operations. Now, following the release of Budget 2021, the Premier held a news conference where he said that Budget 2021 would spend more on healthcare this year than ever before. In fact, he boasted that it was a record. And in the news release, he said the total expense for healthcare would be $23 billion. But I see that the figure in the budget presented is just slightly over $23 billion. But if you look one line over, the total expense for health was $24 billion last year. I'm hoping the minister can explain how the Premier was right and how a $23 billion investment this year is larger than a $24 billion investment last year.
Well, certainly in terms of budgeting, this would be the largest healthcare budget in the history of the province. And so, as the member knows, I'm sure 2020, the current year we're in, created significant pressure in our healthcare system due to the pandemic, and we have resourced health to meet the challenges of that pandemic. But in terms of the upcoming budget year, the $23 billion will be the most significant, largest budgeted amount for health in the history of the province.
So In some of your statements earlier, Minister, you stated that the COVID contingency is $1.25 billion. Now, I'm just curious why you've listed that as a contingency and why you haven't booked that in the health budget this year.
All right, the reason for that is because of the uncertainty in timing of getting past the pandemic. If we knew exactly when we would have enough Albertans immunized so that we could ensure that our healthcare system wasn't going to be experiencing the pressures that it has been experiencing, then we could have, with more precision, included a specific number in health's budget. But because of the uncertainty, we felt it prudent to include a specific COVID contingency for health. And that way, we can ensure that health has access to the resources proactively, but we can also ensure a very sound financial management in allocating the amounts as they're required.
So last Friday, the Minister of Health already announced some spending on surgical initiatives that's apparently coming out of the COVID contingency budget. Can you confirm my understanding that the Minister of Health's spending announcement is actually coming from the COVID contingency that's booked in the budget?
Well, again, we're adding $900 million to health's base budget. Those funds will be used to ensure that we can get caught up on surgical backlogs, procedural backlogs, and we're also including a contingency amount of $1.25 billion, recognizing that there are many uncertainties out there. The Minister of Health is aware that this contingency has been set up, and I'm confident that Health will approach Treasury Board as they see need to further resource health over and above the budget line in 2021.
So did the Minister of Health then make an error when he stated that this surgical initiative was being funded from the COVID contingency?
I have no reference to the Minister of Health's comments. What I can say is what I've just repeated, that we've included $900 million in health-based budget. That increase will be in every fiscal year that we're presenting in the fiscal plan, and we've also added $1.25 billion in a health contingency to deal with COVID and COVID-related issues.
Okay, I want to spend some time now asking questions about the recovery plan. The budget 2021 key fiscal metrics on the page 8 of the fiscal plan sets out a certain amount of money for COVID recovery. How much of that comes from the federal government?
All right. So are you referring to the $1.1 billion in 21-22?
Sorry. Yes, that's correct.
So there was certainly a certain amount of that funding is coming from the federal government. That funding does include our activity on the site rehabilitation plan, effectively the oil and gas reclamation plan. It also includes funding for the Jobs Now program, which will be in part funded by the federal government. It also includes provincial-only investments. These investments include an additional $22 million for tourism related to the tourism sector strategy. It includes $28 million related to energy with respect to their sector strategy, geothermal, and minerals mapping. So it is a combination. We can certainly provide the exact component of federal funds. But you know what I should
Minister,
also note here.
Mr. Chair, if I could just confirm the numbers then. Out of a total $1.1 billion COVID recovery plan spend, I've calculated just on the back of the envelope, given the minister's comments, $50 million of provincial spend. Is that accurate?
No, there would be certainly significantly more than $50 million of provincial spend. But here's the good
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
Chair.
Chair, I would like to be able to answer this question. Here's the good news, and that's this, that we're able to leverage federal funds. Let's remember, Alberta's made net contributions to this nation of close to $20 billion
Mr.
a
Chair,
year.
Mr. Chair, I'm not
Right
interested.
now,
I'm not interested in hearing
in
the
order
minister's.
to,
I'm not interested in hearing the minister's grievances about federal spending. I'm just interested in what the total breakdown on the COVID recovery plan is. What the breakdown is between federal spending and provincial spending. Now, he said that it's more than $50 million. I'm happy if the minister is able to provide me an accurate number now.
I can certainly provide that number with precision, be happy to do that. But as I noted, the $1.1 billion is a combination of provincial funding and a combination of funds that we've received from the federal government. And we're very pleased to be able to leverage at least some federal funds back into this province.
So, Minister, is it my understanding that you will provide that written breakdown to the legislature in a written undertaking? Is that correct?
We would be pleased to provide that breakdown.
Thank you very much. I want to talk now about the jobs now, the federal jobs money, $185 million. Can you tell me how much of that $185 million has been spent since the announcement was made in December?
Yeah, I don't, at this point in time, I don't believe there has been a significant outlay on that program yet. But we can, again, provide additional precision.
So, Minister, I can't see what's going on in the room. When you say that you're providing additional precision, do you have officials coming up with that number at the table, or will you be providing written responses at a later date?
They're working to identify if they can come up with that number at the table. If not, we'll provide a response at a later date.
Thank you very much. While we are waiting then for officials, I'll continue with questioning. Pages 10 to 12 goes into a little bit of detail about some of the sectoral strategies that you've referred to. I'm interested in getting more clarity on the additional investment that the government of Alberta is planning to make in these strategies. So, for example, the tourism recovery plan on page 10.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. That concludes the first portion of the questions from the official opposition. We will now move to the government caucus for 20 minutes of questions from the members. Would you like to combine your time with the minister? And who will be taking the first? Mr. Yassin? Mr. Yassin, go ahead, sir. You'll be going back and forth with the minister?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayes and your staff, for preparing this budget 2021, which is focused on protecting lives and livelihood. I think you alluded to my questions here earlier on in your remarks and the discussion later a little bit as well, but I think this will provide you a good time to kind of reflect in details around these questions. Adequately resourcing healthcare is priority number one in the fiscal plan. How did health operating budget has increased by 9? Why did health operating budget has increased by 900 million? I will have a series of questions here, but I will go one by one, please.
Okay, sure. And that's a great question. The increase in health's budget for $900 million has been twofold. It has been to ensure that we can get caught up on a surgery backlog, procedure backlog that was already higher than I think Albertans wanted pre-COVID. Of course, the Minister of Health had very definitive plans to shorten those wait lists, but COVID has exacerbated the matter. And so it's requiring additional resources to get caught up on surgeries and procedures. The other reason is because the minister was in the process of implementing a number of recommendations of Ernst & Young. Ernst & Young did a performance review of AHS and came up with close to 50 recommendations. Many of them the minister had plans to implement, and a number of those plans, specific recommendations, the implementation of those will have to be delayed. And as a result of that, some of the efficiencies will not be realized as timely as they would have otherwise been.
Thank you. And how much, if any, amount will be going towards continuing caring, community care, and home care programs?
So in total, I believe approximately $3.5 billion is earmarked to those three programs, very, very important programs. And that amount is $200 million higher than in previous budgets. There's been a recognition on the importance of providing care in the most appropriate venue. And, you know, in terms of compassionate care, to provide care in homes where possible, or in continuing care homes where possible, is typically much more compassionate than providing that care in acute care. And it also turns out it results in a much more efficient delivery of healthcare.
Thank you. And how much will go towards mental health sports?
We made a commitment to fund mental health with $140 million over 4 years. So that commitment continues. That commitment is all important today, as so many of us have been challenged during COVID. I suspect there's hardly an individual that either hasn't experienced challenges, mental health challenges during this time of COVID, or knows somebody close to them. And so this investment, I think, is critical. It's timely, and Budget 2021 delivers it.
Thank you. And in a situation like this, there's always a chance for unforeseen costs. What are you doing to address that?
Well, thank you for that question. And again, I'll point to the healthcare contingency, the COVID contingency of $1.25 billion, which we will have available to transfer to health as required. Again, we don't know the duration, length of the pandemic. We don't know how quickly Albertans will be immunized to start to create the herd immunity effect. We're all looking forward to that day, but until that day, we'll ensure that health is adequately resourced to deal with any challenge and every challenge that they might face with respect to the pandemic.
Good, thank you. And last question. What are some health-related capital projects?
All right, and that's a very good question. Firstly, I do want to identify a very important project that we had basically brought forward in Budget 2021, and that's a healthcare center in Lacrete. That region has been significantly underserved in terms of healthcare infrastructure and ultimately healthcare delivery. So we were very pleased to include a $35 million capital project so that we can improve healthcare delivery for folks in Lacrete and for those in the surrounding region. We're also included in the healthcare capital plan is funding for the Bridgeland Riverside Continuing Care Center, the Calgary Cancer Center, the Edmonton Hospital, Edmonton Southwest Hospital. That project continues to be in our capital plan, and it's moving forward. The Foothills Medical Center, an urgent power plant capacity issue, that project will be dealt with. Fort McMurray Residential Facility-based care center, and I could include a hospital modernization with a Misericordia community hospital as well. So those are some of the additional projects that will be funded. Of course, I should mention the basically completion of the Grand Prairie Regional Hospital, as certainly in the Northwest, that's a very important health project.
Of course. Thank you very much, Minister. And I will now turn over to Member Isaac.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and through you to the Minister. Mister, I'm going to just refer you to page 107 of the business plan. In previous years, the previous government, through policy choices, did its best to basically empty Calgary's downtown and didn't seek to course correct when Calgarians found themselves in tough times. You've recently said that the UCP government has no intention of creating a specific program to incentivize or attract tenants to fill the empty floor plates in downtown Calgary. So with respect to page 107 on the business plan, your ministry does speak to creating an environment that attracts investment and job creators and diversifying Alberta's economy. So I'm wondering, how is the government working to create an environment that attracts investment and job creators, and how will the government direct this objective so that Calgarians can see growth in downtown Calgary?
Well, thank you for that question. There's no doubt that the vacancy rates in downtown Calgary are very, very concerning, and it also there's no doubt that the downtown of Calgary offers an incredible value proposition for investment attraction. And so while Budget 2021 doesn't have an exclusive program for downtown Calgary or downtown Edmonton, it has, in fact, Budget 2021 is chock full of economic recovery initiatives that will be incredibly supportive of Calgary and downtown Calgary. And I'll talk about a few of those. Firstly, broadly, we are working to create the most competitive business environment possible, and we're well on our way to doing that. Obviously, we've accelerated the job creation tax cut, ensuring that Alberta has by far and away the lowest business tax rates. We are also working forward with red tape reduction, regulatory modernization. And I do need to point out that the Canadian Federation of Independent Business has given Alberta an A in terms of red tape reduction. And that's a big deal considering we inherited an F from the previous government. Again, this is very important work. And in terms of lasting, durable policy work, work that will ensure the most competitive business environment and ultimately sustainably attract capital and grow the economy. I believe these are the most essential things we can do, but we're doing more. We're also, again, rolling out sector strategies. We've started rolling out components of those strategies already last June when the Premier and I announced the Economic Recovery Plan in Calgary. One important announcement was the implementation of the Innovation Employment Grant to not only support the tech sector, particularly for startups and scale-up companies, but broadly support tech and innovation in every sector and industry in the province, because we know that is so essential to our competitiveness. We announced the recapitalization of the Alberta Enterprise Corporation. Again, that is a fund of funds that invests in many Alberta-based tech funds. We are continuing forward again with tourism, which we know is critically important to Calgary's downtown. I mentioned the $22 million investment that is repeated in every year of this fiscal plan, supporting the tourism sector strategy and the expansion of the tourism industry in the province. Look, Alberta has an incredible value proposition. Downtown Calgary has an incredible value proposition. And I am confident that, well, if there's a great challenge there now with the incredible vacancy, I'm confident that as we position this province to be most competitive broadly first, but then position sectors to be most competitive. And I should include the financial services sector there, because based on my conversations that I'm having here in recent weeks, my expectation is that we will see additional investment and movement of financial services into Alberta, and the downtown of Calgary is a very, very appropriate place for that investment to land. So I'm confident that the way we're positioning Alberta's economy, we will see recovery in Calgary's downtown. And again, I mentioned some of these good news stories, but I do need to just highlight again, recently mCloud Technologies announced that they're relocating their corporate headquarters to Calgary. That's good news. Suncor is moving its offices that it had in Ontario into downtown Calgary. Echelon Wealth is opening its first Western Canadian capital markets office in Calgary. Infosys will move and hire up to 500 positions, in fact, 500 new positions now to create an innovation and tech hub in Calgary. And the expectation is that that will grow in the future. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. Again, I believe there will be increasing momentum and we will see increased investment attraction into this province and specifically in downtown Calgary.
Thanks very much, Minister. I'm going to cede my time to MLA Turton.
Yes, thank you very much, Minister, and both for your comments and your candor during this time. I guess I have a couple questions, specifically on page 19 of the Fiscal Plan. And I really appreciate the stance and some of the comments that you've made about ensuring that the things that are under the control of the provincial government are done well and managed well. And, you know, I just want to make a point regarding the Fiscal Plan where it notes that balancing the budget is the most important step in slowing and ultimately reversing the growth of Alberta's debt and interest costs, and obviously reducing the burden to taxpayers. That's my preamble. It's not in the Fiscal Plan. But I guess, Minister, if you can ask or answer the question, I guess, first of all, what is your plan for returning to balance? Obviously, you know, we are in unprecedented times. I know that earlier this year there was obviously an incredible energy crisis that this province faced, and obviously the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So regarding the path to balance, obviously ensuring fiscal responsibility is key for myself and many of the residents of Spruce Grove and Stony Plain. So what would you say the plan for returning to balance would be?
Well, thanks for that question. That's a very important question, no doubt a question that many Albertans have, as balancing the budget remains of great importance to this government. I believe it remains of great importance to Albertans generally. And yet, at this point in time, it would be disingenuous for us to present a 3-year fiscal plan to balance, given the uncertainty that we're experiencing, not only in the global economy, but in the economy right here in the province. One thing I do need to say and point out is that, of course, in 2019, we presented a 4-year fiscal plan, a credible plan to balance in our first term, and that was a commitment we made to Albertans, and it was a commitment we followed through with. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic, and particularly the effect that it's had on government revenues, has necessarily delayed balancing. In the meantime, we've identified fiscal anchors that will guide and inform our decision making to ensure that we're positioned to return to fiscal balance as quickly as possible. We will ensure over the course of this fiscal plan that our net debt to GDP ratio does not exceed 30%. That's a fiscal anchor. This fiscal plan would leave us at about 26.5% at its highest in terms of net debt as a percentage of GDP. The second fiscal anchor, and I think this is a critical fiscal anchor, that is to ensure that over the course of this fiscal plan, we align our per capita costs of delivering government services with that of comparator provinces. This was a point the McKinnon panel made when they presented their report to us, that Alberta is an outlier in terms of its costs to delivering government services. We made a commitment in Budget 2019 to change that narrative, to align our costs to be at least as efficient as other provinces. Budget 2021 continues with that commitment. Both of those fiscal anchors, I believe, will position this province to credibly return to fiscal balance when we get past this pandemic and have additional economic clarity. Our third fiscal anchor is this, that when we are past the pandemic, when we have additional clarity, we will provide a timeline and path to balancing the budget, which again, I believe remains a very important goal for Albertans, and it's a very important goal of this government.
Thank you for that elaboration there, Minister. I guess a supplementary question I have is, when you talk about the fiscal anchors, obviously there's varying degrees of slack with each one of those anchors that, we may be closer to certain thresholds in one of those anchors versus other ones. So do you have any, or can you elaborate on any of the, in terms of the timelines that Alberta is estimated to bump up against some of those anchors? So for example, one of the anchors you talked about is the net debt to 30% GDP. I mean, based upon our long-term forecasts and the numbers that you have before you, can you give an idea about when that timeline might be reached if we continue on our current course? And also on the second anchor that you mentioned about comparing our per capita costs compared to other provincial or other provinces, can you just maybe elaborate a little bit on that point about what timelines we're looking at as a province where we will be hitting that point where we have true parity with other provinces?
Well, thank you for that. In terms of our net debt to GDP ratio, as I mentioned, within the course of this fiscal plan, the highest ratio that we're projecting is 26.5%, and that would be in the out year. Our expectation is that we will start to see, again, based on our economic projections, increasing economic growth, increasing growth in real GDP terms. And as we start to significantly bring down our deficit and at the end of this term, bring it down, even with our very conservative economic projections, bring it down to under $8 billion, that ratio will actually start to diminish over time. So I don't believe that we will, that post this fiscal plan, we should be bumping up against the 30% ceiling, but we've identified it as a fiscal anchor because in the future, there would need to be fiscal adjustments made, in my opinion, should in fact the economic environment mean that we're going to be pushing that fiscal anchor. The good news is we're projecting 26.5 as our ceiling. Again, that's based on very conservative economic assumptions. On our cost of per capita in terms of delivering government services, by 22-23, we start to enter that range. The range of comparator provinces, and by 23-24, by our out year, the last budget that we'll be presenting before we go back to the polls, we will be smack dab in the middle of the comparator provinces in terms of efficiency as measured by per capita costs of delivering government services. I believe that's a critically important fiscal anchor and one that there's great resolve to meet.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Minister. I guess just to confirm my last question that I have here, I guess before I ask the question, Mr. Chair, how much time do I have left remaining?
Got 4 seconds.
4 seconds, then I give this to my government colleague, Peter Guthrie. Oh.
Thank you very much, everyone. We'll take a quick 5-minute break and return at approximately 10:43. case.
Yes, I would like to share my time with Minister if that's amenable
Thank you,
to
and
him.
Minister, you're okay with sharing time? Absolutely okay. Go ahead, Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you very much, Minister, for being willing to share some time. I would like to go back to some of the questions that I was asking you previously before my time ran out. Now, you had said that your officials were trying to get a solid number on the federal jobs money that had been spent since the announcement in December. I'm just wondering if your officials have managed to pull that number together over the last 20 minutes.
Well, the answer is yes, they have. And to date, there has not been any money out the door yet with respect to the Jobs Now program.
Okay, so will you reconsider maybe renaming it the Jobs Now program to, no, I'm just giving you a hard time. I would like to ask a substantive question. So I want to focus now on the sectoral strategies that are listed on pages 10 to 12. My colleague, Member Phillips, was questioning you on the employment projections that are presented in the budget. Can you point us to any impact on the employment projections that these sectoral strategies are going to have in the aggregate?
At this point in time, these sector strategies remain a work in progress. Ministers are working on them. They're ongoing. And so I don't have any specific numbers with respect to employment related to these sector strategies. I do know, I'm very confident, I do know that as we position these sectors to be most competitive, that it will result in increased investment. And of course, we know that will result in increased job opportunities. And we're seeing that already in the tech sector, for example. I can also point to agriculture. I mean, we've had a very recent announcement of it.
Thank you, Minister, for that answer. And if you wouldn't mind, I will give you the opportunity to respond to some of my questions around the specific sectors. I want to talk about the tourism recovery plan that's talked about on page 10. The stated goal is to double tourism by 2030. Can you confirm for the committee how much money is being invested in that strategy?
All right, at this point in time, and again, that strategy remains a work in progress, so I'm confident there will be more to come. And that's one reason why we allocated $500 million in an economic recovery contingency, so that as these sector strategies are rolled out, there will be additional funding that can be accessed. But $22 million per year for every year in the fiscal plan will be, in fact, is included for the tourism sector strategy. And that's on top of additional funding for destination marketing organizations that we have included in the upcoming budget as well.
So you've allocated $22 million to the tourism strategy every year going forward, but that number is not driven by any sort of jobs projections. It's what determined the amount of, what was the criteria that the Treasury Board and Finance Department used to make that investment?
This was, again, a sector strategy that is a work in progress. So there will be additional details to come from Jobs, Innovation, or Economy and Innovation Ministry. And so I would suggest to the member that stay tuned. There will be additional details, but we have included, we know that the ministry requested $22 million in additional funding to launch their tourism strategy. So we've included that in the budget.
Okay, moving on now to the aviation, aerospace, and logistics strategy that's listed on page 10. Sets aside $2 million for rail capacity assessment. Now, does that come out of the COVID recovery contingency line?
No, this amount is included directly in the budget because this was an amount that we knew the details around. And my expectation, again, this sector strategy is still very much a work in progress, but we knew that there was $2 million required for a rail capacity study. I think that study is of critical importance and will have a significant bearing on this sector strategy. That's been included. Stay tuned for additional details around the greater strategy.
Can you tell the committee what investments will be made in aviation? It's called an Aviation, Aerospace, and Logistics Strategy. You've got $2 million in rail, which I would assume covers that logistics piece. What will be the investment in the aviation and aerospace pieces of that strategy?
Well, again, as this strategy is a work in progress, I cannot provide any detail around additional funding required. Again, I will point to the contingency amount related to economic recovery of $500 million. That's why we put it in place, so that as these sector strategies roll out, they won't have to wait for the next budget year, but that we can, in fact, fund these strategies as required to kick them off expeditiously.
So is it fair to say that with the tourism, you've said that's tourism recovery plan, that's a work in progress, aviation, aerospace, and logistics strategy is a work in progress, that Albertans will see some kind of concrete plan and investment before the end of the year?
Yes, my expectation is that ministries will be rolling out these sector strategies in the upcoming weeks and months. And because of that expectation, again, we've included funding in the contingency. Now, I do want to point out, though, with respect to sector strategies, we have been rolling out components of those strategies as they've become available. We've been rolling them out on a timely basis. And again, I'll point to the Innovation Employment Grant, recapitalization of the Alberta Enterprise Corporation, of examples of that.
So thank you for that, Minister. Have any job projections been created for the aviation, aerospace, and logistics strategy?
Again, until that strategy is fully developed, it would be premature to provide some kind of job projection.
Job projection be provided when the strategy is rolled out, and will the investments that go into that strategy be based in any way on the job projections?
Yeah, my expectation as these sector strategies roll out is there will be some type of job projection, certainly a range at a minimum of expected job creation related to each one of them.
So on the pharmaceuticals and life science strategy, there's listed $20 million in the Li Ka-shing Institute. Now, can you confirm for me, is that provincial investment or is that federal investment?
That's entirely provincial investment, and this is, we're very fortunate to have this institute that includes a Nobel Prize winner in Dr. Houghton. At this institute. So again, we're pleased to fund it. It's a $20 million investment over 4 years.
So are there any other investments planned in the fiscal or in the pharmaceutical and life sciences strategy currently?
There is work being done on that strategy right now. And so again, as that strategy matures, I would anticipate there could be additional funding requests. And I will point to the $500 million economic recovery contingency.
Going to assume then that, similar to the other strategies, that there are currently no job projections associated with this strategy. Is that correct?
That's correct. It would be premature and disingenuous to roll out job projections when, in fact, we don't know the details of the strategy.
Thank you. Can you tell the committee, Minister, what the impact on the significant cuts, hundreds of millions of dollars from the budget of the University of Alberta, will have on the success of the pharmaceutical and life sciences strategy?
Well, firstly, as you pointed out, we are funding a key component of at the University of Alberta in the Applied Virology Institute, the Li Ka-shing Applied Virology Institute. So we are very intentionally funding key components of this sector strategy. With respect to overall funding to post-secondary institutions, I think if you recall, the McKinnon panel pointed out that Alberta was a huge outlier in terms
Minister,
of the cost to educate.
Minister, I got an
Chair,
answer.
I would like to finish this.
I got an answer to the question that I was looking for, Mr. Chair, and I would like to move on to my next question.
Thank you. You have about 10 seconds.
Thank you. I want to go on to energy strategies. Can you quickly confirm for...
Sorry to interrupt. We'll now move on to a 5-minute block combined, I assume, with the Minister for the Government Caucus. I believe that the time was ceded to Mr. Guthrie.
I think MLA Turton wanted to finish up.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Turton.
Thank you. So, yes, had a couple more questions just during the break there. So I appreciate MLA Guthrie for taking the last remaining 3 seconds of the last segment. So thank you again, Minister, obviously, for being here today. I guess I just have a couple more follow-up points that popped in my head. Just regarding my prior line of questioning, really had to deal with the path to balance and the fiscal anchors that you talked about. Now, obviously, again, just to reiterate, I know you mentioned about the net debt to GDP ratios, the per capita costs to match our provincial comparators as per the McKinnon report. But I guess my question are there any other notable decisions that are required to ensure that the budget gets balanced that are outside of those fiscal anchors that we should be aware of? Obviously, your role is very nuanced, it's very complex. I know you've touched base about the main key points that are guiding your decisions, but are there any other decision points that you reference that could potentially influence how quickly or that we actually get to those fiscal anchors that you previously referenced?
All right. Well, a key component to balancing the budget, a key component to fiscal health is economic recovery. We can't cut our way out of an $18 billion deficit. And that's why our economic recovery plan is so key in budget 2021. We absolutely have to position this province to disproportionately attract investment so we can see job growth, so that we can see increased opportunity for Alberta businesses, and ultimately increase fiscal capacity for the province that will generate additional revenues in the future. So economic recovery is key. It's key to job creation. It's also key to a sustainable fiscal trajectory for the province.
Well, thank you very much for your reference about economic recovery, Minister. And again, back to the fiscal plan, it talks about, obviously the long-term plan is to no longer have a deficit and to eventually be working on, the debt, which obviously has interest costs that, obviously cut into potential funds that could be going into public services that many Albertans require. At this point, is there any line of sight in terms of plans or strategies that eventually will start to tackle the growing debt that we have here? I know that's still a couple years down the road, but one aspect that I have appreciated about how you've been approaching this ministry, Minister, is the fact of long-term thinking, making sure that you're always looking ahead. And so has there been any thought regarding how the province will be tackling the growing debt?
Well, again, there's, I think, an important sequencing here. Number one is we need to continue to deliver government services most efficiently, and we will be measuring that in terms of our per capita cost compared to comparator provinces. We will get there in this fiscal plan. That's critical. Along with that, at the same time, we will be working to ensure that we can see economic growth, and which will result in additional fiscal capacity for the province that will translate into increased government revenues. Those are really the key ingredients in budget 2021 to position this province for sustainable fiscal trajectory. At some point in time in the future, it will be important to take a look at our revenue structure in the province to understand, to ensure that we have the most efficient, appropriate revenue structure possible. But in terms of concrete goals to balancing the budget, economic recovery and growth and efficient delivery of government services are the two key priorities.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Minister. At this point, I'd like to cede it over to my good friend and colleague, Emily Peter Guthrie. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Guthrie.
How much time do I have? I'm just kidding. That's
5
okay.
minutes and 30
That's okay.
seconds.
Just making sure it wasn't 4 seconds.
More than 11 seconds.
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate you being here this morning. I'm going to just focus here on the capital plan a little bit. On page 27, 127 of the budget, it states that we are setting out a robust capital plan, one that is vital to economic stimulus and recovery and is consistent with increased counter-cyclical spending introduced by the Government of Alberta in the wake of the pandemic-induced recession that began in 2020. Now, the 3-year capital plan sits at $20.7 billion, including $1.7 billion increase from last year's 2020 budget. And, I know, Minister, with you being from Grand Prairie, you know how impactful these kind of projects can be on a rural community, for jobs, for the local economy. So I was wondering, could you elaborate a little bit on the details of this capital plan and how it pertains to rural Alberta?
Well, I can say that there is a very significant component of the $20.7 billion that will be invested into infrastructure right across the province and certainly in rural Alberta. I want to point maybe initially to our capital maintenance and renewal effort. We will be increasing the capital maintenance and renewal budget by over $300 million to $1.3 billion this year. And the reason for that is twofold. One is we can very quickly ramp that activity up. And that's important in terms of providing job opportunities for Albertans at a time they desperately need it. 53% of will be province-wide projects, and this is in transportation. And this will be working on highway resurfacing. This will be working on projects that will ensure that we're maintaining our existing infrastructure so that it will be available for future generations. So capital maintenance and renewal budget increase will be a significant amount of that will be in rural Alberta. We will also we've included $120 million in irrigation investment. And this is a significant investment, almost a generational investment that will expand the irrigation capacity in the province of Alberta. This will be in the southeastern corner of Alberta, that part of the province that has additional heat units that's needed. And it's an incredibly competitive and productive region agriculturally in the province. So we're committing $120 million of provincial dollars to that project over 3 years. It's going to leverage a total spend of almost $900 million that will result in an additional 200,000 acres of irrigated farmland, which is significant for the agriculture industry in the province. And it's also significant to the agri-food manufacturing industry in the province, which until very recently was the largest subsector of the manufacturing industry in the province of Alberta. A real good news story there. We will be building schools right across the province. I can name some here. There are a few schools in Lloydminster that will be going ahead. There are schools, the Elk Island Catholic Separate School, a new school in Camrose. Port Vermilion School Division will be experiencing a new facility there. There is a new school, the Horizons for the Horizon School Division, a solution for Milk River and Earl Rivers schools. There is a replacement reconfiguration of the Kate Andrews High School. That's in the Palliser School Division. And I could go on and on. There's a school project in Manning, certainly a couple in Red Deer and Grand Prairie. I'm familiar with a few projects as well.
Yeah, thank you, Minister. I know from a transportation perspective, Airdrie Cochrane is looking forward to 40th Avenue overpass being completed in Airdrie. as well as the 1A and 22 intersection project in Cochrane. I think both communities are very, very excited to see those get going, and they're going to be getting going shortly here and getting people to work. In Cochrane, from the school perspective, there's a Catholic school K-9 that is just breaking ground, doing utilities right now, so that should be completed in the next year and a half. So some pretty exciting stuff that's going on in the area. One thing that government's been doing is...
Sorry, I'll have to interrupt you. We'll now move on to the official opposition for a 5-minute block combined with the minister for a total of 10?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Billis.
Okay. Thank you. Minister, I want to follow on some of the previous questions from my colleague. If you refer to the fiscal plan on page 10, I'd like to start off by talking a little bit about your technology and innovation strategy. Now, your first outcome is developing, attracting, and retaining a future-ready workforce with skills aligned to diversify and grow Alberta's economy. Now, I appreciate that that you folks are committing $20 million to the Li Kai-sheng Institute for Virology, but the fact of the matter is, in this budget alone, $75 million was cut from the U of A. The year that we receive a Nobel Prize, our award-winning research institution, globally renowned, is taking a $75 million cut. And I'm wondering, Mr. Minister, how does that fit with your objective of developing talent when we know that that is the #1 criteria for all tech AI companies is talent? And we'll go down this path further. But I'd love for you to somehow square for me a massive cut to our post-secondaries. How is that helping you develop talent and supporting our job creators?
All right, Chair, I trust that you'll let me answer this question fully because it requires more than one sentence. We have world-class institutions, which the member's alluding to, and we celebrate those institutions. They're critically important for the future of the province. They're critically important for the recovery, economic recovery, and they're critically important to ensure the next generation of Albertans has the skills required to be successful in the current economy and in the digital economy. Here's the other reality, though, is that Alberta institutions, well, I'll back up. The cost to educate our post-secondary students in this province has been extremely high relative to comparator provinces. In fact, we've been over $5,000 higher per FLE than BC, $10,000 higher than Quebec, and $15,000 higher per year than Ontario. We can no longer afford to be an outlier. Moreover, our completion rates were poorer than other provinces. So as a result of that, the Minister Nicolaides, the Minister of Advanced Education, is working with post-secondary institutions on a new funding formula, working with post-secondary institutions to ensure that programming around advanced education can be delivered most efficiently and effectively and most sustainably in the long term. You know, the reality is just to throw more money at a problem doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And we recognize that in this government. We recognize that we need to evaluate every program we deliver critically to ensure that Alberta taxpayers are getting best value, to ensure that Alberta students are receiving best value, to ensure that future Albertans can have the skills required for the next, for the new economy. And I agree with the member that that skills and in fact appropriate labor is the critical piece, very often the limiting piece for expansion in the important tech industry. I agree with the member there. And I know that you will find we have a Minister of Advanced Education that is working hard to ensure that post-secondary institutions can deliver.
Continue on my line of questioning. Thank you, Minister. I mean, I'm asking the question because the headlines around the world are talking about massive cuts to the very institutions that produce talent. You know, Minister, earlier you were boasting about Infosys coming to Calgary, which is very good news. I will remind the Minister that Infosys is a company that our government had been working with starting 4 years ago to reach this decision today. And the Minister knows full well, investment decisions like this do not happen overnight. And so Infosys has been clear that the reasons they are coming to Calgary, number one, talent, number two, quality of life. The corporate tax cut that you insist is the reason that is going to drive diversification and help our GDP. Nowhere has Infosys ever mentioned the corporate tax rate. Why, Minister? Because that's not their driver. Their driver is talent. And when you gut the very post-secondary institutions that produce this talent, that's what the world is talking about. I'm not disagreeing with you, Minister, that there aren't ways that we can ensure that dollars are going toward, the moving to where the puck is going, to ensuring that our programs are developing the right talent graduating from our post-secondaries. But to me, the solution on trying to diversify the economy is not cut the very legs out from the institution which attract talent. The reason Alberta is ranked 3rd in the world for artificial intelligence is because of Amy at the University of Alberta. And the reason that we have scientists like Dr. Rich Sutton at the University of Alberta is because governments for many years, in fact, since 2006, have been funding Amy. And I credit the former PC government. I credit our government continuing those fundings. But we will not attract the talent and develop the talent here at home with these massive cuts. So for me, it's contradictory is a soft way of framing the fact that we gut the very institutions that are trying to help you, Minister, deliver on your mandate of developing talent and attracting and retaining talent here in the province. Now, I wanted to move quickly because my time is running out to your FinTech strategy, Minister, where you talk about, I'm pulling it up here, page 11, you talk about, Minister, that a concierge service will be opened. I'd like to know if that's going to duplicate the very work that Invest Alberta is doing, considering they just got a $25 million bump.
Good, thank you. And that is a good question. The answer is no. It won't duplicate the efforts at Invest Alberta. It will complement the efforts at Invest Alberta. There's always a regulatory component, particularly in financial services. And as we worked with Invest Alberta to determine who was most appropriate to deal with that whole regulatory interface, we determined that it would be best if that capacity was housed in TBF. We will be working very, very closely with Invest Alberta. I believe there's great potential in financial services and within the fintech sphere to grow that sector of the economy.
Thank you, Minister. So I'm going to move in my last question because of time to the agricultural strategy. But basically what you're saying, to confirm, Minister, is there will in fact now be a concierge service housed in TBF, and Invest Alberta's mandate is to act as a concierge service. So you have just confirmed that there are in fact now 2 different branches within the GOA performing the same service. One is focused on fintech and the other is focused on every other industry. At some point, Minister, I would love to know the specific regulatory burdens that the fintech sector face, because in page 11 in your fiscal plan, you talk about a sector-specific regulatory sandbox that will reduce the regulatory burden on fintech products and services. I would like to know, if possible, maybe in writing the department can list some of those regulatory burdens that the fintech industry is saying, this is what's stopping us from coming into Alberta. My final question, Minister, and I appreciate that I've taken up much time talking. The ag strategy, in addition to the irrigation investment, okay, which we do agree with, are there plans for a value add strategy? What supports can Alberta agricultural producers expect from this government to support them in exporting to new markets, expanding to new markets, and of course supporting the incredible work that's being done here, including the Leduc Food Processing Incubator?
Sure, and that's a great question. Agriculture, I believe, has great potential in the province. It's going to be a key component of our economic recovery. And you know, there's a number of pieces to answer that question. Firstly, most broadly, it's about ensuring that we're positioning this sector to be most competitive. We compete, and I know this personally, we compete in agriculture on the world stage. We compete with U.S. Primary producers and U.S. processors. We compete with the Australians. We compete with Europeans and even those in Asian markets. And so a focus on competitiveness is critical, and our efforts around red tape reduction, regulatory modernization is absolutely crucial. In terms of additional specific details
Sorry,
around...
I hesitate to interrupt, Minister, but we'll now move on to the government caucus for 5 minutes and combined with the Minister for 10, I assume. Go ahead, Mr. Guthrie.
Thank you, Minister. In commenting, I guess, a little bit further from what the previous member was saying, I guess he was suggesting that the previous government had, they were admitting that they were unable to get the deal done with Infosys, and that this government did get that deal done. And, you know, Infosys possibly, they were waiting for the conditions to be right. Perhaps there was too much red tape, tax rates, et cetera. No company is using one particular factor when you make a move. There's a combination of things that you use to make those decisions, and you're waiting for the correct environment to exist before you make that decision. So, Minister, I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the job creation tax cut and having one of the lowest jurisdictions in Canada, and what that may mean for us as far as attracting new businesses to Alberta.
Sure. Well, and that's a great question. I appreciate the chance. I'm getting quite an echo. I appreciate the chance to elaborate on that, because having the most competitive business tax rate is a key ingredient in a greater value proposition, and we have an incredible value proposition in the province of Alberta. Firstly, again, we have a preferred business tax rate, corporate tax rate, to the tune of 3.5% and 4%, more competitive than other jurisdictions. That's critical. As businesses, companies, investment proponents make decisions around where to deploy capital, they'll take a look at jurisdictions where they can ensure their best return. And corporate tax rate is a part of that decision making. But our value proposition goes beyond that. It does include the fact that we have an improving regulatory environment, which is critical. That includes both the specific legislative pieces and regulatory pieces, and also the culture in which that environment is administered. And this is admittedly a work in progress, but again, I want to point out that we are on a path of continual improvement, receiving an A from CFIB. Alberta also has real advantages in terms of our cost of living. We have a low cost of living right now. That's part of our value proposition. And if we talk about Calgary, and we could talk about Edmonton too, in terms of world-class commercial space at very, very affordable prices. Right now, that's part of our value proposition. We don't have a payroll tax in this province. We don't have a capital tax. We have preferential personal tax rates, although the previous government did increase our incremental rates by 50%, which is problematic. Fortunately, overall, we still have preferential, reasonably competitive personal tax rates. On top of that, we have an incredible province where people love to live. Calgary, for instance, is identified as one of the most livable cities year after year, around the world. So that all plays into our value proposition, of which our preferential corporate tax rate is a key ingredient. And I know, even from comments, we can look back at the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, who weighed in specifically and stated our preferential corporate tax rates was instrumental in spurring additional capital deployment in the energy industry last January and February, which ultimately resulted in increased drilling activity. So we know that that piece is a very critical component of our greater value proposition.
Thank you for the explanation. Minister, I'll cede my time to MLA Getson.
Thank you. Mr. Getson, are you online?
Yes, I am. Sound check, is this working?
Go ahead.
Perfect. Well, appreciate that, MLA Guthrie and Minister, for your time here today. My questions are going to be more along the lines of the COVID response and what's taking place. But if you'll indulge me a little bit, Minister, given some of the dialogue earlier on Keystone XL, and being one of the members of the government caucus who actually came from that industry, I would like to afford an offer to the member from Lethbridge East, or West, I should say, anytime she wants to learn about pipelines, the crew configurations, how the course of construction takes place, the crew configurations, and the number of people that go to work.
Point of order.
I would be more than
Point of
happy
order.
to,
Point of order.
23H, I, and J. The member here clearly is trying to use language likely to create disorder by talking too directly or indirectly through Mr. Chair to another member. That has nothing to do with estimates. It has nothing to do with asking the minister questions. Clearly, MLA Getson is trying to create disorder and place a very thinly veiled attack against another member. I request that you rule in favor of point of order, and Mr. Getson apologize and withdraw his comments and ask questions to the minister and not speak directly to another member.
Thank you. Any members from the government caucus wish to comment?
Yeah, I'd like to respond if I may, Chair.
Actually, I think that might be out of order. Mr. Lowen, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, this obviously is not a point of order. This there was no intention, of course, on the member's part to create any kind of disorder. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion on pipelines and the costs and what's went into the pipelines. That obviously has been set out earlier in this meeting. This is not a point of order, and I think we need to carry on with the business of this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Prepared to rule. In the opinion of the chair, this is actually a point of order, and I would suggest that Member Getson apologize to the committee for this, but I would welcome him to have a conversation, a private conversation with the member, but stick to the documents in place before us. Thank you.
I apologize, Mr. Chair, and again, it wasn't my intent to cause disorder. So, Minister, with that on the Keystone XL project, it was brought up a couple times about the crew configurations, the number of people that were available in those lines. So I guess I'll rephrase the question so it's not in specifics to another member. Minister, are you aware that the trenchless crossing that took place was the first course of work, and that those crews typically wouldn't exceed about 30 people? And Minister, are you also aware that during that course of construction down in that area of Oyen, that Michaels was the contractor, and they did employ a number of crews, of which the predominant activities were taking place on the pioneering activities, the stripping, the actual stringing, and also doing some weld up? Are you aware of that, sir?
Yes.
Perfect. And with that, I appreciate that, Minister. And given that the town of Oyen saw a big uptick in those areas, and that those crews also followed all the COVID protocols, are you aware of some of the ancillary activities, again, and the importance of that project to that area of the region?
Yes, I believe I am.
Perfect. Thank you, Minister. And with that, I'd like to pivot back, if I could, to the COVID. And if there's an echo here, I apologize. I really have difficulties with these remote viewings. So the ministry estimated about $2.5 billion in COVID-19 recovery plan that was allocated for disaster and emergency assistance contingency. So with that, what was included in that contingency, and why is that important to Albertans right now, sir?
All right, good. Well, thanks for that. Again, of that total $2.5 billion contingency, $1.25 billion relates directly to healthcare costs and resource requirement. And so Again, that will ensure that health is adequately resourced to deal with any challenges that it experiences during COVID. No doubt there will be additional costs related to an accelerating vaccination program. At least we trust it will be accelerating, providing the feds can actually provide the vaccines. It will also relate to additional hospital costs, comfort care worker costs, contact tracing costs, all of those costs that relate to dealing with the pandemic. And again, we don't know how long we'll be dealing with COVID in this province. I think we would all agree around this table. Hopefully, we're getting past this pandemic sooner than later. But because of the uncertainty around the intensity and the duration of the pandemic, we have, I believe, prudently included the funding in a contingency that we can allocate to health as required. With respect to the additional components of the contingency, $500 million is earmarked for economic recovery and relief. And again, we don't know how long we're going to be dealing with this pandemic. In the event it drags out longer than what we envision,
Sorry,
public health
sorry
restrictions.
to interrupt again. We will now move on to a 5-minute block for the official opposition. Would you like to combine your time with the minister?
I would like to request that, yes, please, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Phillips.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I'm going to just draw your attention to an issue that came up on February 26th in media reports and comments that were made after the budget. And one of the issues that has been really important to the City of Calgary, to the citizens, where there's in excess of 10% unemployment right now, is the revitalization of the downtown, and people really are worried about that because of the tax shifting. So, it goes to some of the pocketbook issues that we see in the fiscal plan as well. So, at that time, you indicated that there was nothing in this budget directed to downtown revitalization strategy for Calgary because that was not up to the provincial government. Subsequent to that, we had some government utterances that there would, in fact, be some form of task force because others thought that it was actually up to the provincial government. Other ministers did. So, Minister, can you direct me to, is it coming out of the contingency or other recovery plans where the downtown Calgary strategy might be funded from?
Well, Chair, I'd be happy to provide additional clarification here because the member's statement is inaccurate. I did not state that there was nothing in Budget 2021 for downtown Calgary. There's so much in Budget 2021 for downtown Calgary. We take a broad-based approach, not an exclusive approach geographically, and that was really what my statement consisted of. And so in terms of Budget 2021 and downtown Calgary, we are working on a whole series of sector strategies, and I can identify tourism. Certainly the tech sector strategy are very key for downtown Calgary. The financial services sector strategy will be key for downtown Calgary, and everything we do to position this province's energy industry to be more competitive will be important for downtown Calgary. That's why we rolled out the Innovation Employment Grant early days, because it was important for the tech sector in the province and for every sector as they employ and pursue new technologies. That's important for downtown Calgary. That's why we recapitalized the Alberta Enterprise Corp. That's why we've included $10 million of funding for an enterprise fund that will ensure that Invest Alberta can be very competitive as we compete with other jurisdictions. That will be important for downtown Calgary. And moreover, these initiatives will be important for Drayton Valley. They'll be important for Lloydminster. They'll be important for every region of this province. But downtown Calgary will be a huge recipient.
Thank you, Minister. So, you and I both know that business runs on targets. So, are there jobs targets associated with those strategies?
Well, I think I've answered that question, but I'm happy to reiterate these strategies are a work in progress. Job targets, certainly information around the expectation of job creation is an important component, and it is my expectation that as these sector strategies roll out and become public, that there will be an estimate of job creation within them and certainly a range of jobs expected.
So, Minister, I just want to go back to something that was mentioned about investment earlier, and new capital outlays from oil and gas firms. So you made some comments about that in reference to some questioning from the member for Edmonton Beverly Clairview, but it seems to be contradicted by page 51 in the fiscal plan, where we see the top sentence that says oil producers are expected to maintain capital discipline. And in fact, when one goes back to page 50 and looks at that chart, we don't see new capital outlays returning to even 2016 levels, where we know we had an historic drop due to the drop in WTI, until 2024. So, Minister, can we get some clarification on what is actually expected from the government of Alberta? Because it is not, at least according to your own documents, that we're going to see a significant increase in capital investment. And it is equally contradicted on page 50 that we have seen an expected massive increase for 2021. I'm seeing here that it's far below the years of 2015, 16, 17, 18, and 19.
The COVID pandemic and the resulting price crash, which actually sent WTI into negative territory for a short period of time, hit our energy industry very, very hard. And we've taken, again, a very conservative, cautious, I would say prudent approach to our economic assumptions. And those assumptions then are played out through the course of this fiscal plan document. We are expecting that energy companies will be working to strengthen their balance sheets, which took a big hit over the course of the spring and summer months when energy prices were so low. Strengthening their balance sheets will be important to position them to deploy capital again to increase production in the future. But when I cited the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers' recent expectation that investment will increase by $3.4 billion in 2021, I'm simply citing a private sector forecast. And given what we're seeing, even in the last days, in terms of energy pricing globally, I would expect that we will see increased capital deployment in the energy industry in Alberta. That will be important to the province. That will also be very important to downtown Calgary.
Thank you for that, Minister. I just want to move on to a completely different topic, if you'll indulge me on that, and that has to do with AGLC and regulations, for which you're responsible, and under the key objective 2.1A business plan, page 109. So I've heard a lot lately from small liquor store owners. And in particular, they are quite concerned about the end of restrictions on what is called inducements in AGLC regulations. And essentially what it means is that, big producers can buy their way into the biggest stores. The people that I've heard from ALSA, from the association, and from individual business owners, that this is an idea or a proposal that will hurt only small producers and the small retailers and benefit only the big guys, or in this case, big guy of a liquor depot. So that's what I've heard from small business owners in my riding and elsewhere. So given that there has been quite a lot of opposition on this from the liquor store folks, I'm not talking about, there's a sort of a mixed bag of opinion on cannabis, so we'll leave that aside for a moment. But on the liquor store piece, I'm looking for a commitment that you will pause any of these changes and recommit to more consultation with the Liquor Store Association and the small, both producers, like the brewers and distillers, and the retailers, because these are thousands of entrepreneurs. They do not want this policy change, and it will have an effect on jobs and economic activity, particularly in smaller places, if it is not paused.
Well, I appreciate the members' advocacy here, and what I can say is there's been no decision taken on this policy, and I can assure the member and all Albertans that we will take feedback from every sector of the industry. We will consider it before making any changes, and certainly before we make any decision around this. Certainly, industry feedback is critical as AGLC considers policies going forward.
So, Minister, can you then commit to a timeline on that decision so that people can have some level of certainty? I know I was, I just stopped into my local wine shop on my way out of town on, I don't know, Saturday, and they were saying that, they are pausing some of their future plans just to see how this playing field levels out. They don't need that kind of uncertainty. They're a small family-owned business. So can we at least have a timeline here? Because uncertainty in business is, people just need to know one way or the other to make plans.
Well, I would agree that certainty and predictability is very important for business investment. And I believe the comment period just closed a couple of days ago. But I will commit to this, that that decision will be made as expeditiously as possible after considering all of the feedback that AGL has received around this policy.
Now, as I understand it, there have been many, many businesses who have written in opposing this. Does that carry weight with you, Minister, as you deliberate on this?
Well, I think, as I mentioned...
Sorry to interrupt, Minister. We'll try and catch that on the next round. We now move over to the Government Caucus for 5 minute. Do you wish to combine with the Minister again for a full 10-minute block? Mr. Getson.
Yes, I do, Chair.
Thank you.
If the Minister is amiable to that.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Minister, if I may continue on the $2.5 billion COVID recovery. So I may have missed it in the last frame of it, or last questions, but could you advise what has already been spent underneath this fund today?
Well, given that this fund will be available for budget 2021, the fiscal year starts April 1st, 2021. So we've not spent anything from the fund. It's not been allocated at this point. It's simply there as a contingency. And the one component that I didn't discuss is that in budget 2019, we established an annual disaster contingency of $750 million. That is part of the $2.5 billion. That contingency remains in place. That ensures that we have funding to deal with natural disasters that occur periodically in this province, and it ensures that we can backstop everything from an adequate forest fire mitigation response to ensuring that AFSC can fully comply with insurance indemnity costs related to their agriculture commitments.
Appreciate that, Minister. And one last question, if I may, on that. So how do we ensure that these funds, they'll be treated responsibly going forward? And how do we, again, given that it's kind of a fluid and dynamic situation with COVID, how do we ensure those controls and measures are in place?
So that's a great question, and that's one reason why we've included these funds in a contingency, so that to draw them down, to transfer them, will require a Treasury Board oversight and approval, and it will also require an order in council. And so we do have layers of financial oversight as we administer these contingency accounts.
Perfect. And thank you, Minister. And if I may, Chair, I'll cede my time over to the MLA from Calgary East.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister. Before I ask my question, I want to applaud the Minister and all officers and staff of the ministry for the outstanding work in the development of this budget that would maintain economic stability while at the same time providing the necessary supports Alberta need at this time. As you have mentioned, Minister, on page 109 of the business plan, under key objectives 1.2, we're currently in a global economic recession. The all, including our great province, has had to adopt a fiscal impact of COVID-19 and the decline in oil prices. Businesses need the tool to operate, grow, create jobs, and drive Alberta's economy forward. And that is why I'm excited to hear about your ministry's effort and to develop and implement the Alberta's relaunch strategy and the Alberta recovery. My question is, Minister, how will this implementation of Alberta's economy relaunch strategy and the Alberta recovery plan provide jobs for Albertans?
All right. Well, that's a great question, and it could result in a long answer, but I'll try to keep it as tight as I can. The budget 2021 has included a very comprehensive approach to economic recovery, and it's really dovetailed into our overall economic recovery plan. I mentioned, really our foundational effort of creating on broad-based terms the most competitive business environment possible through regulatory modernization and reform, through ensuring we have we're the most competitive jurisdiction from a tax standpoint. That is very, very critical. And the regulatory reform and modernization is key. That's critical. I know that regulatory environment is a very, very key decision-making criterion in terms of investment decisions. But on top of that, we are also we've rolled out an increased, enhanced capital plan. We've talked about the $20.7 billion capital plan. We're increasing our capital spend in the upcoming year by $1.7 billion. And that will provide additional opportunities for Alberta small businesses, for thousands, tens of thousands of Albertans who desperately need a job opportunity right now. Moreover, it will also ensure that we can build key capital infrastructure in this province for 70 or 80 cents on the dollar. I have a friend who is a contractor that occasionally bids on government projects, I found out, because he told me the other day, he said, we've been bidding bare bones at our cost, and we've not been successful on any of our bids, which tells me that Albertans are getting great value right now as we invest in core infrastructure and infrastructure that will improve our competitiveness and productivity and lead to increased private sector investment. We have to focus on very defensible infrastructure projects that will provide future generations of Albertans great value and position the province for economic recovery. As I mentioned, this will result in supporting 50,000 direct jobs and 40,000 indirect jobs over the course of this fiscal plan. And the third component, of course, is our sector strategy approach, and that is identifying sectors that we believe we have a real competitive advantage in and positioning those sectors to be most competitive. And that will result in a funding requirement in some cases. We've talked about some of that funding, whether it's to increase funding for tourism, the additional funding of $22 million to Travel Alberta, and it also includes specific regulatory modernization efforts within those sectors, which I think, again, will be some of the most lasting and durable changes that we can make as a government, positioning ourselves for economic growth and recovery.
Can the minister please provide details to the committee as to how Alberta's economic relaunch strategy will be powerful support to small and medium-sized businesses?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, and I can certainly point to everything I identified in terms of investment attraction, because we know in this province, and I've seen this firsthand during my years in public accounting practice, that when in a community or region where you see large investment take place, that provides great opportunity for small businesses in the region. And so whether those businesses, are in agriculture or energy, or whether those businesses are in the service sector, professional services corporations, or in the retail trade, or perhaps even in the restaurant and greater service sector, additional investment into a community provides great benefit for growth and opportunity for small businesses. Included as I mentioned, in budget 2021 is funding for the Jobs Now program. And that program will also assist small businesses in procuring appropriate skills within their employees. It will support small businesses in reaching out and hiring Albertans that need to train and need to upgrade their skill set. And so that will also be a program that will directly support small businesses. We know that much training takes place on the job, and this will support Alberta employers in accomplishing that. On top of that, our contingency plan remains in place. So if this pandemic should drag out, if public health measures need to stay in place, those businesses that are directly affected by those public health measures will at least have a pool of funds where government can identify appropriate support for those affected businesses. I hope that won't be the case, but we do have funding available if it is.
Once again, thank you, Minister. How is the ministry ensuring that the relaunch strategy includes support that meets the need of businesses, owners, and delivers on what is actually required of these businesses to push towards future growth?
Well, that's a great question, and you know, I could point to my previous answer, I think, which includes many of those key components that will position Alberta small businesses for future growth. And again, maybe I'll talk right now a bit about our tourism sector. The tourism sector has been hit very, very hard by this pandemic, and I would suggest the tourism sector right across the country and even globally. It's been hit very hard. So that's why our sector strategy will be critically important, a sector strategy that will position that sector.
Thank you, and I hesitate to interrupt again, Minister, but we'll now move on to the official opposition. For a 5-minute block, would you like to combine your time with the Minister?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair.
For a total of 10 minutes, go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of things here, Minister. We talked a little bit in the estimates debates over the course of 2020 about the introduction of the online gaming platform from AGLC, and you and I both agreed that that was a good thing to start to replace some of the revenues that had obviously been lost through in-person casino activities through 2020. I asked you at that time if a charitable revenue sharing model had been under consideration or was being developed in some way to address many of the lost revenues from charities and nonprofits from casino revenues. And I'm wondering where we're at on that.
All right. Well, I do agree that it was really appropriate to implement that online gaming model, and in part because we were losing, you know, millions and millions of dollars to offshore platforms, and so that's one reason why it was important. The other reason it was important is because through AGLC we can provide social protections that can help prevent against addictive behavior, which can be so costly with respect to gaming. So with respect to the charitable gaming model, AGLC is in the process of undertaking a review with respect to that model. We'll be pleased to report the findings of that review. I believe it'll be upcoming within the next couple of months. That's my expectation, and so we'll be pleased to report back on their findings.
Minister, I've heard from a number of charities and nonprofits, and you know, I think most of us in this room probably have the experience of, you know, working a casino for our kids' hockey or ringette or soccer or whatever, you know, organization, and having to pull some of those late nights to volunteer at a casino. I certainly have done that many times myself. So people are writing to me, and it's across the board, right? We're talking about people who volunteer for museums and people who volunteer for legions and across the province as well, and they are worried about the charitable gaming proceeds review, and they are worried about getting less. So I know there's a review ongoing, but there are some very specific assurances that a minister can provide to groups, even when something is under review, which is, are there going to be changes, or have you rejected them already, that lowers the amount, either through pooling arrangements or other revenue arrangements, to nonprofits?
I recognize the significant contribution that Alberta's nonprofits provide to every region, every community in this province. And so while a periodic review of programming is essential, and that's what we're undertaking here, and I'll be very interested in the observations, conclusions of that review, I can certainly, Chair, assure the member that I recognize the importance of predictable, adequate funding for civic society and for nonprofits in this province, and that will be reflected in any decisions taken as a result of the recommendations coming from the review.
So I heard predictable and adequate. I didn't, and so I heard that as a commitment. Good. I'm wondering if I can get a commitment to all of the folks out there that there will be no changes that reduces the amount. It might still be adequate, but it may also be a reduction. That commitment can be made regardless of what the review shows, because ultimately the minister holds the pen on this stuff. So they're watching, and I would like to see a commitment that their proceeds will not be reduced as a result of any decisions that are taken in the next couple of months.
Well, it would be very premature to start to comment on a review for which I've not seen any conclusions or recommendations or observations. What I can, Chair, is again commit to the member that I recognize the great value these organizations provide in communities and the importance of appropriate, adequate, and predictable funding. And that fact, that criterion will be factored into any decision upcoming. Here's the reality: there's a growing list of entities that all want in on this basically largely fixed amount of money, and we have to ensure that we have a model that will advance funds to those organizations in our communities who really deliver real value to our most vulnerable, to our youth, and to the other objectives as prioritized by members in those communities.
So things that a minister can do now is rule out certain policy options, regardless of what a review says. So I am not hearing that there is a ruling out of a reduction in the amount of money that nonprofits and charities can get from volunteering at these casinos. But I would like to give the minister a chance to perhaps make another commitment to folks who have lost their casino and bingo revenues. Is there a mechanism that the minister can share with the committee and with Albertans that there will be at least some replacement of some of those revenues for missed casinos and bingos, for folks who had them scheduled last year under the previous model and couldn't do them for obvious reasons? Is there a commitment to helping those organizations?
Well, absolutely. And again, I recognize the great contributions they make because, Chair, like the member, me and my family have been involved in various fundraising events, including casino events, to support our local 4-H club, for instance, and also local sports teams when our kids were involved. So I recognize the value. I also recognize the hardship that COVID has created by simply limiting these activities and reducing funds to the organizations. And so I can assure the member, Chair, that all of that will be taken into consideration as we take a look at the committee's recommendations. And I can also assure the member that I have no interest in improving ultimately the government's, in increasing the government's take around this. I recognize the great value that civic society provides, and I want to ensure that any changes that would be made would in fact improve the value proposition for these organizations.
Minister, have you examined options for increasing the take for casinos? Casinos asked you for that, and is that built into any of the projections here?
No, we haven't built any changes in because we've not made any changes to the structure with casinos.
There's been some, questions asked around the dissolution of the lottery fund and moving it into GRF. And I noticed that in Schedule 23 of the fiscal plan, you provided some visibility into where the lottery fund funds were going, and that's good, and I thank you for that. There used to be, and it's in the TBF annual reports and in the AGLC filings, that there was about 50 million in net financial assets over the course of the year that was kept within the lottery fund. And just for my awareness, or you can follow up in writing, this is just a technical question, as the lottery fund was dissolved and the money went into GRF, I'm just wondering if you can just draw the line for me of where those net financial assets went to, and just help me out in reading that part of the fiscal plan and also the annual reports.
So a big piece of the rationale for eliminating several funds across government was that we had hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in these funds, which was a capital that was tied up. There's a cost to that. And so we've eliminated those funds in terms of sitting on cash that's providing no value. That was, again, the real benefit. What I can assure the member, Chair, is that the funding model has not changed. That, in fact, charities and recipients, beneficiaries have received and will continue to receive the same amount that they did prior to dissolving the lottery fund.
So I'm just wondering if I can get just a commitment on a technical follow-up from the minister in a written undertaking, and the breakdown of the transfers to...
Apologize for interrupting. We'll now move on to a 5-minute back and forth with the government caucus. And who is going to be taking that lead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Singh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for letting me continue. And once again, thank you, Minister. Can the Minister please provide details to the committee as to how the Alberta Recovery Plan will ensure Alberta's economic diversification, growth of its existing sectors, and steer the province towards long-term economic success?
Sure, great question. Happy to work to answer that. Budget 2021 includes a number of initiatives that I believe will result in continued economic diversification in the province of Alberta. That's been happening now for some years. And of course, our sector strategies are clearly strategies that will encourage growth in sectors such as tech, such as tourism, such as aviation and aerospace, such as financial services, which again will directly result in a more diversified economy. But I also want to point to the fact that our corporate tax reduction, our business tax reduction, will also disproportionately assist non-energy companies. Energy companies pay a significant amount to the government of Alberta through royalties. And because of that, their contribution through corporate taxes then is a smaller percentage of their contribution to the Alberta government than our businesses and sectors that don't pay royalties. And as a result of that, even our business tax reduction will again disproportionately support non-energy industry sectors, which will result in increased diversification. I want to say this as well, that while I really believe we will see accelerating economic diversification in the province, as I talked about our great value proposition in Calgary and right across the province, that will result in increased investment attraction. It's not either or with the energy industry. It's increased economic diversification and growth in non-traditional sectors, at the same time positioning the energy industry, the agriculture industry, forestry for continued growth. We know that those sectors continue to create, our real wealth creation engines for the province and for the nation. They are also important.
So, Minister, what are the ministry's specific roles in the implementation and delivery of these strategies?
Well, again, in terms of the ministry roles, we were responsible for reducing our business tax rate. We're also responsible ultimately for our red tape reduction effort. And again, I mentioned how important I believe that effort is. I think that will be one of the real durable initiatives that will position this province for decades to come if we get this right, and I believe we are, in terms of creating the most competitive business environment. The ministry is also responsible for introducing the Innovation Employment Grant, which again ensures that we can compete with other jurisdictions in the tech sector. This Innovation Employment Grant was a very innovative approach, an approach that will reward incremental activity in research and development spending and dovetail really well with our preferred corporate tax rate. So an innovative program, a program that again will result in increased business diversification, which was in fact a responsibility of TBF.
Thank you, Minister. And how is the ministry and the province ensuring that these strategies don't create additional and unnecessary red tape?
You know, that's a great question, because that's a really great question. At a time of economic challenge, there's great pressure on governments to do something, and it's important that we're very thoughtful in the initiatives we bring forward, because there can be unintended consequences of otherwise potential well-intentioned responses. And so we want to ensure that we don't add additional red tape burden as we respond to our great economic challenge. And that's one advantage of having an associate minister of red tape reduction, a minister in an office that keeps a close eye on red tape, on new legislation, on new programs as they roll out, to ensure that we can keep our regulatory burden at a minimum.
Thank you, Minister, and I apologize for the interruption, but I must advise the committee that the time allotted for consideration of the ministry's estimates has concluded. I would like to remind committee members that we are scheduled to meet next on this afternoon, March 9th, 2021 at 3:30 p.m. to continue our consideration of the estimates of the Ministry of Treasury, Board and Finance. For health reasons, please remember to take any drinks and other items with you as you leave. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.